SQOLOGY podcast interview with Steve Weigner. Klif and I are on the call today with Steve Weigner as a special guest, and I think we want to review some of the events from this season that Steve participated in. He was at the big Atlanta show this summer and then was also at the SVR show. So I know we want to get into some of those details, but before we do that, a little bit of background on Steve. I've known Steve for, 3 years or so, Steve, maybe?
Yeah, I'd say 3 or 4 years.
Something like that. And I originally saw you on that web forum that everybody is on. And then I met you in person, I think at finals 2 years ago. It was my first finals. You were there.
Right.
And we chatted a little bit. And I know you were competing in Mazda 3 back then and continued to compete that last season. Then this season, you've got a new monster vehicle you've revealed. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started in the hobby, what you've been doing, and just give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I got into actual competing about 6 years ago. I've always had a passion for audio. I'd say maybe a couple of years ago, I stopped playing, but I was a musician playing drums in a band for a period of time and enjoyed that. You know, as a youngster, I was very big into art. And so between my position at work, which is an engineer, just sort of all these components sort of come together in this car audio hobby for me, which makes it really enjoyable. So, you know, I like to build vehicles. I like the challenge of designing a system and fabricating and tuning and, you know, scratches all those different check boxes for me for things that I enjoy. And you know, yeah, I've been doing it for 6 years and certainly enjoying it.
Well, it's really cool to see you so active on the internet. I mentioned I've seen your build blogs on Dyma, which is the web forum a lot of people are on, and I watch a lot of your activity in the Facebook groups. And it's really cool that you put everything out there. You put your thought process out there, your decision making, the reasons for your decision making out there, and it's really cool to see that transparency.
You know, we all start from a point of knowing very little to nothing about this hobby, and I think what's great about, you know, the social media platforms and the forums is that we have that venue to share this knowledge with each other. And you know, I've certainly gained quite a bit from other people being willing to share that information, and I think it's just right that we should all sort of do that in turn, so we can not only increase our own knowledge, but, you know, further our understanding of acoustics in the car and our ability to reproduce that as effectively as possible.
I completely agree with that. I was going to mention that as a side note, last year I know you won a coveted award from Mecca, and I think that was what the Mecca Spirit Award is that what they called it?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, and that's basically a Mr. Nice Guy award, which you are one of the
It's
nicest guys in the hobby. So, yeah.
I take that as a compliment. I was honored to receive the award. I know sometimes the Mecca Awards are sort of behind the scenes and don't get quite as much, you know, attention as the SQ Awards themselves. But there's a lot of people that help keep the wheels turning in the hobby, and people who are, you know, in there day in and day out and helping to share knowledge. And I think it's pretty cool that Mecca recognizes those individuals and helps to promote that aspect of the sport.
Klif, are you there?
I am here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, Klif.
You guys are doing an excellent job. So,
Well, we're going to get into the part of the interview here that I'm completely irrelevant in, and that is the wrap up or the overview, you know, summary of what happened at the Atlanta show and the SVR show, which for personal reasons I was at neither. So I think you and Steve are going to kind of take over here and get into some of that.
well, actually, I think we can back up a little bit further than that. Steve, you were at the first Driven show as well, weren't you?
Yep.
Another one I wasn't at.
Ben's like, what's a Driven? I think, again, like you were saying, Steve is really good at feedback, letting people know his thoughts, good, bad, which is both very important. And that was a big reason, be great to have Steve on here because he's been to several of the events, and also I'd like to get a lot of his just general feedback, overall on what he sees as working, what is differentiating these shows from other shows, and what we can do better. But with the Driven show, I mean, obviously that was a much smaller event. There's two judges versus anywhere from 6 to 14, like the other events. So it's much more low key. But what was your takeaway on that first event? Probably not really knowing what you were getting into at that point, Steve.
Well, the one thing that I liked about the show was that SQOLOGY had worked to bring in both IASCA and MECA formats into the event, which I think is important because both of those offer a little bit of a different flavor in the SQ competition scene. They both look for some slightly different things in the way that they score vehicles. And although we do have some crossover, they typically have some different judges as well between the two organizations. So that first and foremost was something that drew me to wanting to compete at that show.
I'm going to go ahead and dip the hand in tar. What do you think the differences are between what Mecca and IASCA are looking for?
I think there's a couple of different key things. I think if you ask the question to most people, they would probably respond that IASCA looks for more of a neutral sound that is true to the recording, and that Mecca typically looks for more of a live reproduction type of a sound. Mecca's standard is live music, and IASCA's standard is really the recording and how true your system reproduces the recording.
I can back that. I think the presentation of both reflects that as well. So yeah, I would agree with that as yet another explanation. And I guess the next show was the one in Atlanta at Hybrid. What was your? Obviously, that's a very different show, a very different show than most events. So it was a lot of throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what worked and what didn't, and some things failed miserably, and other things I think went okay. But what was, uh, as you know, being there, I was either at a different location or stuck behind a computer screen somewhere most of the time. So I didn't get a chance to really mingle with you guys much, which is one of the things I want to fix next year. What was your takeaway as a competitor during that event? Both days of it, Saturday and Sunday.
Well, I would say that there wasn't much that really didn't work about the event, in my opinion. I thought everything went smoothly as far as just the competition running and timing and all that. But I was present for the first iteration of that event last season, and certainly a smaller turnout in the number of cars, but it was the first time an event like that had really happened. And I think we may have had somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 cars this season with SQOLOGY involved. We had 27 IASCA cars, 22 MECA cars, and I think that what really makes this stand out as a premier event of the season is the sheer number of judges that you get at the show. Typically, like you said, you might get 2 judges or 3 judges at an event. And at this one, we've got several teams of judges in the vehicle. You could have up to 12 to 16 judges in your car in one weekend at this combined event. And that type of feedback is extremely valuable as you approach the end of the season and finals. So,
Klif?
myself attending, I certainly recommend that to anybody that can make it out to that sort of an event.
Klif, can you kind of explain the judging process for that event? I know I've seen there were 13, 14 or whatever judges there, and I know that they judge in teams. Can you kind of explain how that works?
Sure. So basically, we had 7 teams of judges at this event. Plus, we had, I think, one or two kind of on, like myself and Haji Grape were kind of on standby for 2-seat judging. So that's where we got to 16. Essentially, there's every vehicle has 2 judges in it at a time. Now, they're not necessarily doing 2-seat judging, but one is focusing on the spectral side of things and one is focusing on the spatial side of things. So that is, one judge is focusing on tonality, linearity, those, that side of thing, and the other judge is focusing on the staging, the imaging, the technical aspects.
They can communicate back and forth when they're in the
Absolutely.
vehicle. Listen.
It's up to the judges on how they want to do it. But the initial kind of format set forward was for one judge to do, for instance, if you and I were judging together and I did tonality and you did spatial, then you would have the score sheet and I would tell you the scores to write down as it goes. It creates some accountability, it creates some conversation, and it gives the passenger seat judge while the driver's seat judge is going to kind of get a feel for what's happening on throughout the vehicle. The passenger side of the vehicle, unless it's a 2-seat class, is never judged. It's purely for feedback and somebody being there and working together on it. And then they swap places. So then the first judge goes into the passenger seat goes in the driver's seat, and then he will complete the spatial side of the judging and complete that. So they're really only focusing on one part of the score sheet all day or all weekend, which from a judging aspect, I find those two things almost always tend to be okay, I'm going to do this part first, I'm going to do this part second. They don't, in my brain anyway, they don't tend to blend together as much as here's one aspect of it, here's another, and there's always shifting gears in doing that. Whereas this way, theoretically, the judges aren't having to shift gears; they're able to go through and just go car to car to car to car based on tonality only, and then car to car to car to car based on the spatial aspects only. 2 sets of those judges, so 4 judges were completing the mecha side of the show, and then 4 judges the IASCA side of the show, and then the remaining judges used a completely different score sheet that was a SQOLOGY score sheet that was, again, kind of a completely ground up, throw spaghetti against the wall and see what worked type of thing. But then they were using a different score sheet that was essentially, other than a portion of the score sheet called listening pleasure, which basically they could write down whatever, or listening enjoyment, whatever score they wanted between 0 and 10. It could be 9.7, it could be 8.3, totally subjective, but how much they would want to drive this car home and how much they enjoyed the listening experience of it. And that was really the only number they marked down on that score sheet. Every other thing on that score sheet was a written description of the sound that then they could pick what fit best. There's numbers behind that. So once it's scored, then we get a number system from it. And then we actually averaged all those together for the overall winner of the show, which there's much less emphasis on placement or winning at the show. The person who gets the best score gets a trophy. From there, you get a bunch of score sheets, and that's really the biggest part of the event, is getting those score sheets, because it's equal to going to at least more than a few shows, because you might not always get a different judge when you go to show, whereas this way you're getting a plethora of feedback all at one time, which is really difficult to get anywhere else.
So every pair of judges judged every car? Is that
in this year, correct? So
wow.
we had 27 cars. There was one car I think that did just IASCA. So there was 26 cars that had 14 judges through them. Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. And I know that's an incredible preparation event for competitors to get all that feedback from multiple different judges. But when you get all of those judges together, judging the same vehicles and communicating with each other about what they heard, I think it's as much of a judge's preparation and training event as it is a preparation event for the competitors, which is really cool.
I think you definitely get a lot more of the judges, and Steve might be able to attest to some of what he's seen throughout the year, just from a competitor standpoint, seeing just his score sheet from show to show. But I think a lot of things where there might be some confusion on, or ambiguity on, at very least brings them to light, if not gets the judges kind of more cohesive on being consistent on those things. And that's where we try to break it up too, where judges that normally wouldn't work together are working together at this event. So again, methodologies are going on the West Coast versus the East Coast versus the Midwest, trying to mix all those up a little bit and get the positive aspects from everybody to kind of mix it up. Anyway, that's kind of the basis of the event. Back to Steve.
Yeah, I think another component of that is not just the number of judges, but the quality of the judges as well. What I've seen at these events is that you've got judges who are either current finals caliber judges or have judged finals in the past, or who have been extremely high level competitors who are now judges. And I think that is also a big value add for a competitor that might consider going to a show like this. You've got all of the number of judges, the quality of the judges, and then you can take that feedback and look for consistent findings between these judges and really hammer away at your vehicle to really prepare it.
If you get one person telling you that you need to do something, or one person giving you a bad score on something, or there are so many variables that might be involved with that, and going out and changing everything in your vehicle because of one judge's valuation might work. They might be very well right, and you might be way ahead for doing it, but it's a risk. Whereas when you're able to get these many judges through it at once, and you're able to get 3 or 4 judges agreeing in one weekend on what you can do to improve, then it makes it much easier to take that progress forward. Now, when you were competing, and maybe this is digging too deep, but when you were competing, or others that you knew were competing that you might have talked to, were people changing settings between judges too much, or were they kind of letting it go and see where it ends up at the end?
Of those that I know and that I talk to regularly, we try to not make any of those changes, because if you do that, then you can't really rely on those consistent comments on the score sheets to be accurate. If you're adjusting things between your judges, especially at an event like this, when you think about an event like finals, where you've had a lot of experience, perhaps with a specific judge, and you know that they may hear something slightly different than you do, or that another judge does. Well, then I can see that making a little bit of sense to make an adjustment to a tune for a specific judge, and I know some competitors do that. But at an event like this, really the value is in keeping the tune the same and finding out what the judges are agreeing on that the system needs work. When you go back and you're changing things, you really just can't correlate that based on the judges' feedback. So for me specifically, no, I don't make any changes at the shows. I like to see what they have to say in common, but I'm sure it happens with some competitors.
I totally agree with you on that. It's too easy to get caught up in thinking that, in 5 seconds you can figure out the magic sauce, and it rarely happens.
Well, the other component, though, is that with this specific event, the goal isn't really to win the event. The goal is to get that feedback. That's why you have so many judges out there, because we want the feedback. We want to be able to prepare the car to be able to win finals, and to do that, you really have to be able to rely on that critical feedback from these qualified judges.
Another cool thing about these types of events where you've got so many competitors is that the competitors are all interacting and going back and forth to each other's cars and providing their own feedback on what they're hearing. And for the newer competitors, it's really cool to be able to sit in some of these cars that are known good cars, and I say that in quotes, and kind of hear, the differences between what's going on in these cars that score consistently highly versus what's going on in their car. And then to get feedback from those competitors, conversely, in their vehicle, and, have them sitting there and along with the judges, tell them what they're hearing.
Yeah, exactly. We value the feedback from our fellow competitors as well. Like I said, I've been competing for 5.5, just about 6 years, but there's a lot of guys who have been doing it a lot longer than me and have more experience than me. And, we all value getting that feedback from our colleagues and from our fellow competitors. So it's always a great opportunity for that, especially when you see the number of cars that are turning out for these events now.
Shifting from that event to Steel Valley, I know there's a lot of culture difference between those two shows. Obviously, Steel Valley is much more of a, I would say, prestigious show that has a lot of history, has a lot of amazing vehicles that have been through that building over the years. What was the overall benefits you saw of Steel Valley, and the outcomes there, and the differences between those two events in particular?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Steel Valley show is one that I read about as a kid. I wasn't competing at the time, being still relatively new to the competition scene. And like you said, there have been a lot of really renowned vehicles and competitors that have come through that particular venue. Larry Chisner did a fantastic job with the show. I think we had a really nice turnout. I was actually pretty surprised by the number of vehicles that turned out, based on the the location, and this being the first time they've done SVR in, geez, I don't know, at least 10 years, I'd say, right? As far as how the event was run, I thought they did a terrific job. You still had all the same benefits that you had at the Atlanta event. I would say that this one was a little bit more of the competitive atmosphere versus the trying to gain knowledge and feedback type of atmosphere, which is totally fine.
There was a not money round, but big prize round, as I understand it, at SVR2. In addition to the IASCA Mecca Awards, they had a top 30 or something?
Yeah, it ended up being a top 30 because of the number of vehicles that attended, which was pretty awesome.
So there's some incentive there to be a little bit more competitive to win that top 30 round, I think, than like the Georgia event.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some trophies at that event. There's obviously the money round portion of the event. So it's gonna have people trying to step up their game and bring the best vehicle that they can to that show.
Contrasting those events, then going from the shows you did all year, obviously did more than just these 3 shows, but going through the season and then coming to finals, how did your level of preparation feel versus previous years? And how do you think those shows accurately reflected what was to come at finals? As far as, do you feel like they prepared you for everything, or was there some bits missing on either side that would help prepare you better?
Well, I think they certainly helped to prepare me better for finals. I mean, we had a couple of the judges who actually scored for finals that were there for the SVR show and Atlanta show, which was terrific. But more than that, I was able to take that consistent feedback on my score sheets and then go back and listen to the vehicle and see what it was doing and see what the judges were picking up on, and go back and make those necessary changes to just add another point or two to the score sheet there at finals. And the event there was pretty amazing this season. I've been out there for finals the last 3 years, and the turnout we had this year was pretty incredible. A lot of cars, a lot of terrific cars. Just the overall level of the cars that are turning up for finals now. You don't really see too many vehicles coming in that are just very poorly prepared and aren't doing a lot of things right. The performance of the cars is getting to be so good. And I think that was reflected in a lot of the scoring with IASCA and Mecca this season at finals.
While we're talking about finals, I saw in one of the threads about the podcast, someone asked if we could talk about some of our favorite cars and what those systems consisted of and what made them so awesome for us personally. And I don't know if you want to get into that. I know that's putting you on the spot. I know I hesitate to list my finals because I listen to so many good cars. If I don't list somebody's car, like it just did you have a favorite car or two that you wanted to discuss quickly?
Yeah, I have no problem talking about the cars that I enjoyed. I think that's part of the fun of this hobby, is getting to hear the different ways that other people are doing things in their vehicles, and how they may sound different than your own, and how that can help to lead you in a direction to making yours more enjoyable for yourself. So yeah, I'm always an open book as far as that goes. I think that some of the vehicles that really stood out to me this year, first off, would be Steve Head's Blazer. I think he does some things in that vehicle that are a little different than others. And of course, it's significantly more modified than a lot of vehicles. So he's able to accomplish some things that, your typical Toyota Camry might not be able to do. I really enjoyed the presentation of his. I really enjoyed Matt Hall's vehicle. His was a standout for me last season as well. The staging in his, the tonality, it's just a very, very well-rounded vehicle overall. And I also really enjoyed Tim Smith's truck and Rob Bess's Acura, which is continuing the winning tradition and beating me as well. So
he did really well in IASCA this year, which I know is kind of a new thing for him. I know they always do really, really well. And when I say they, I mean Rob Bess and Robert Corwin, because they're kind of very similar. I know they have historically done very well in Mecca, but not so well in IASCA. But this year, I think they both did really well in both organizations.
Yeah, they've got a lot of good things going on in their vehicles, and that shows in their performance at these big events and finals. I think one of the main things, though, that I'm listening for when I get into a vehicle is, does it sound real? There's plenty of things that cars can do to just not sound bad or to not do something wrong. But when you get in a vehicle and the cabin sort of disappears and you're listening to the music and it just has a real quality to it, that's something special. And I think that those vehicles that I named were really ones that stood out as being able to make the dimensions of the vehicle sort of disappear and just have a really nice real quality to them.
I totally agree with you on based on what I heard in all those cars.
I didn't hear any cars.
You were stuck in a room where you belong, so
you were working the calculator this year, so
So they were all great.
Yeah, of course they were. So another thing we kind of put up on the threads about the podcast a while back is a phone number that we set up for SQOLOGY. So if you've got questions, you've got comments, you've got feedback, or if you just want to be funny, you call this phone number and you leave a voicemail. That phone number is 575-347-1380. And I don't know if we've got time in this podcast to play any of the messages that we've received so far. I don't know if Klif was prepared for that or not. But I do know that we have some messages. And if we don't get to them this time, we're definitely going to play those very soon. So call that number. Again, it's 575-347-1380 and leave us a voicemail.
We can definitely do that next time, and hopefully maybe we'll get a call or two in between now and then and be able to do that. Steve, is there anything from your end before we wrap up that you have on your head that you would like to throw out there or discuss or anything?
Just the SQOLOGY season points thing. I know you guys had gone over that in the last podcast, which was great. I thought it was nice to have the modest presentation there at finals, but just another reason for people to get out there to the SQOLOGY events. There were some pretty awesome prizes given out this year, which were definitely appreciated.
Awesome. And you were, what, third overall, second overall?
Came in second place in the points totals this year.
Congrats. Awesome. That's awesome, Steve.
All right, thank you.
You're super, like I said, I wanted to get you on this podcast. I know Klif did too, because you were at so many of our events, but also because you're so active online. And I know a lot of people follow you and respect you and they trust your advice and things that you have to say. So it's nice to get people like you on here and kind of get your thoughts on everything. So thanks for joining us.
I enjoy the podcast program, and thanks for having me on, guys.
Yes, sir. And we'll talk soon. Hopefully have you back on here to discuss some other stuff that might be a little more controversial.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Right, bye.
Hello. I would like to call and tell you about your podcast. Is so very nice. I have listened to it many times. Your recent call with, I enjoy this very much, but I think you have made him in a different light where I don't think you are very nice to him. He has very many good ideas, and you tell him that you very much don't appreciate his skill set for this car audio. Very much, I appreciate the call back. I would like to tell you more about my concerns about the place you put him in the light of his ego. Please call me back. My number is Thank you very much.